Pastor Sam dead. My North Salem cousins lived in a clapboard farmhouse just off of the Ridgefield Road. And it was even smaller than this one, boys and girls. Their name was Platt. And there were a lot of them. 4 girls and 2 boys. And the parents and their aunt who lived with them too. The house wasn't really big enough for them. The 4 girls slept in one room with the aunt, 3 girls in one bed, and the biggest girl and the aunt in another. The boys slept out in the barn except during the coldest weather when they made a palace on the floor in front of the kitchen fireplace. When I saw how crowded they were, I realized I was lucky to have been raised, not to have been raised on a farm. There was usually plenty of room in the tavern for me and Sam. We got there after dark. They gave Father and me some bread and stew, and they all crowded into the kitchen to talk. It seemed like they all wanted to talk at once. They hadn't seen Father for a year, and they wanted all the news. How Mother was, and what the war was like in Reading, and where Sam was, and all the rest of it. They were curious about me. They'd been hearing about me for 12 years, and now, finally, they were seeing me with their own eyes. And I'd been hearing about them all of that time, too. And it was interesting for me to see them. I felt shy, but they didn't because it was their house. So they began asking me a lot of questions until Mr. Platt made them all be quiet so he and Father could talk. Father told them about the scary thing that had happened on the way over. Mr. Platt nodded. He was a tall, thin man, and his clothes hung on him loosely. They call themselves patriots, and they say they're only trying to keep people from selling beef to the British, but we don't believe it. They'll take it and they'll sell it to the British themselves if nobody else will buy. They're just cattle thieves. He was angry. Lawlessness has run wild. Common decency between people has disappeared. Every man, it seemed, armed against his neighbor. In Reading, we still have law and order, Father said. We should have it here, too. There are plenty of loyalists in Westchester County, but there's no control. Rebel and Tory live almost in open warfare with each other. With hot food in my stomach and the open fire nearby, I was having a hard time staying awake. I knew I ought to go to bed. We had another hard day ahead of us, but I didn't want to miss the talk. I'm happy we haven't got to that point in Reading, Father said. Oh, you're fortunate. People have been tarred and feathered here. Houses have been burned and livestock slaughtered. Both sides are doing it. One side burns a house and the other side retaliates. It won't be long before they're hanging people. I'll tell you, it's true life. What do you think retaliate means? If one side burns a house and the other side retaliates.
Does the same thing?
Right, to get, like, what's a word that you think of when you think of retaliates? Gets, Kayliana.
Fights back.
Fights back, you want to...
Repeated, they want to get...
Good, keep going. What's another word that you can come up with when you want to get even with someone? You call that?
Revenge.
Should, yeah. It's a synonym for revenge, retaliates. We're in the middle of page 101. I'm sorry, we're on the bottom of page 101. What about the party that escorted us here? You see? That's one of our committees of safety. They're about all we have to keep order. You were lucky. Somebody along the way saw you pass by and knew there'd be trouble. There'll be trouble all the way to Hudson. My father shook his head. I suppose that next year I won't be able to get over here at all without an armed guard escorting me all of the way. I judge you're right, life. My lids closed. I struggled to open them again. And then the next thing I knew, Father was shaking me, saying, "Come on, Tim, time for bed." My cousin Ezekiel Platt took me out to the barn. He was only a little older than me. He was tall and skinny like his father and had red hair. We climbed up into the loft, wrapped up some hay and blankets for pallets, and settled into bed. Ezekiel was curious about me and wanted to talk. Were you scared when those men came? I didn't like to admit it. I was scared, but I didn't want to lie either. Some, I said. Did you ever have that happen to you? Oh, we haven't had any trouble yet. But Father says that's just because we have kept our noses clean. We didn't make an issue of being loyalists, he said. Are you a loyalist? Of course, aren't you? I guess so, only sometimes I'm not sure. Sam's fighting for the rebels, did you know that? Oh, we heard that. Father got into a rage. He said that Sam was too smart a boy to be fooled by sedition. Top of page 103. He fought in the battle in New York, I said. Father says he's being headstrong. He's very daring besides being smart. My father didn't think he was so smart for joining the rebels. They're likely to be hung when the war's over. Well, maybe they'll win, I said. They can't. How can they beat the whole British Army? It'll serve them right for being disloyal. So do you see what's going to happen to people that went against the king? Everyone believes that when this war is over, and it will be over, and who's going to win? What does everyone think?
British.
The British. They're going to win. And so all those people going against the British are going to be what? Yeah, they will be severely punished if not hung. Well, I don't know. The way Sam explains it, it sounds right to be a rebel. And when Father explains it, it sounds right to be a loyalist. Although, if you want to know the truth, I don't think Father really cares. He's just against wars. We didn't say anything for a while. Well, if you go to be a soldier, which side would you fight on? The loyalists, I guess. But in my head, I really wasn't sure about that. Suppose one day we were fighting and I suddenly saw that it was Sam I was aiming my gun at. We woke up before the sun, hitched the oxen to the wagon, herded the cattle out of the pasture where they had spent the night, and started off again on the road towards Peekskill. Peekskill was on the Hudson River. We would turn south there and go down the river about 5 miles to Bear Plains Point. From North Salem to Peekskill was more than 20 miles, so it would take us all day to make 15 miles to our next stop, Father's Friends, south of Mohegan. We were supposed to pick up another escort. I hoped we would find it soon. I didn't like traveling through this country alone, and I kept looking around all the time for galloping horsemen. The escort picked us up at Purdy Station. They stayed with us for about 10 minutes, and then another escort took over. We spent the night with Father's Friends, pasturing the cattle in one of their fields. In the morning, another escort took us to Peekskill. It was a pretty big town. Hundreds of people lived there. It was on the edge of the Hudson River, and as we rolled down the hill into the town, we suddenly could see the water. I couldn't believe it. It was the biggest river I'd ever seen. Across the other side were beautiful hills, some of them craggy and rocky, dropping straight down at the water's edge. It was so beautiful, I could hardly keep my eyes off of it. Father, it's so big, I said. He grinned. This is nothing, Tim. Well, wait till we get down to Bear Plains Point. The river there is 3 miles wide. The escort left us at Peekskill. We turned south, following a road that went along the river. Oh, it was exciting to me. There were all kinds of boats going up and moored offshore. Scattered along the riverbank were docks and wharves with skiffs and rowboats tied up to them. Boys and girls, here's a couple of pictures to help you see it. Well, this is the nets or the scenes, and this is sort of what it would look like or what he's approaching. Maybe not so clustered with the ships. Scattered along the riverbank were docks and wharves with skiffs and rowboats tied to them. Men and boys were fishing from the docks, and sometimes we could see out in boats, seining. It seemed like fun, a lot more than being a tavern keeper. Well, I wish we lived here, Father. He shrugged. If wishes were beggars, horses would ride. Still, if wishes were horses, beggars would ride. Still, I said. Oh, the river's pretty, he said, but fishing's hard work. You try hauling one of those scenes up from the bottom sometime, and you'll find out. And you can see how laden it is with the fish in that net. You have to carry that up and bring it up on the docks and clean each and every one of those fish.
Ugh.
Yes.
You get paid real well. But
I don't know how well you get paid.
Not that well. Gee.
No, you don't get paid that well. It's hard, laborious work. Are all the people here loyalists? I'm in the middle, page 105. Oh, a mixture. The Dutch settled most of the land up and down the Hudson. There are a lot of them still here, and they don't much care for the English crown. We reached Fairplank's Point at the end of the afternoon. It was wedge-shaped spit of land which poked out into the river. Father had been right. The river was gigantic here. See where we are? I could just barely make one out the houses on the hillside. Across it they were so far away. It was like a huge lake filled with boats. Oh, they call this part of the river Haverstraw Bay, Father told me. At Fairplank's Point, the land was not steep, but sloped gradually down to the water. There was a long wharf jutting out into the river, with some boats tied to it. Set back on the land were pens for cattle, sheep, and hogs, and around and about were sheds and houses belonging to the men who worked in the docks and shipped the livestock. Most of it went down to New York. There were thousands of British troops quartered in New York, and British sailors too, besides the regular population of about 25,000. They needed as much beef as they could get, and the prices were going up all the time. Father found Mr. Bogardus, the man he usually sold his livestock to. We herded the cattle into pens and untied the poor hogs and turned them loose in the hog pens too. And then Father said, I'll be talking business with Mr. Bogardus for a while. Have a look around, but don't stray too far. The sun was going down red and cold over the dark hills across the river. It felt good to be free of the animals. I had nothing to worry about for a while, and that was nice. Going back would be easy with only the wagon full of goods to watch over. Of course, there could always be trouble from cowboys, but Father didn't seem worried about it, so I put it out of my mind and I wandered down to the wharf to see what was going on. The river was beginning to turn black and the fishing boats were coming into the wharf. They tied up the men and the boys that handed out barrels of fish. I could see that Father had been right. They looked tired and wet and cold and dirty from the mud that came up from the bottom on their nets. One boy, about my age, got off a boat and just sat down the dock, and he stayed there, all huddled up under his coat, too tired to move. They carried the fish into one of the sheds near the wharf and began to clean them. It was amazing to me see how fast they worked. Snap, snap, snap with a knife, and there was the fish with its head slapped off and opened up into the white fillets. What is snap, snap, snap? What kind of figurative language is that? Excuse me. Finally, there were a lot of pretty big fish too. Sturgeons, they called it. Can you picture the sturgeons? Yeah. The big bony fish, right? Finally, I began to get cold myself, and I walked off the wharf and back up into the pens. It was warmer there by the animals, and after a while, Father came along. We staked the oxen out of the bit of grazing common near the pens and went into the tavern for some supper. Father was happy. He had got a good price for the cattle and had negotiated for most of the other things he wanted to bring back to Reading. It was a good wagon load. 2 hogshead of rum, a half dozen big sacks of salt, a couple of barrels of molasses, a large chest of tea, a sack of coffee beans, a dozen brass kettles and some tin pots, a chest of breeches and some brass buckles, some drills, knives, files, axes, and spades, a small boxes of pepper, allspice, cinnamon, and white powdered sugar. We slept that night in the tavern. Oh, we ought to sleep in the wagon and save the money, Father said, but I guess it's too cold for that. The next morning, we loaded the wagon with the things Father had bought and started off. So do you think that wagon's pretty full?
Yeah.
Can you imagine all the things inside and how much value they have? Father had bought and started off. Father tied the horse to the back of the wagon and walked along beside me to help manage the oxen. It was nice having company. I was sorry to say goodbye to the Hudson River. I liked being there, and we reached Peekskill and turned up the long hill from it. I kept looking back over my shoulder at the water shining on the sun until we went over the brow of the hill, and I couldn't see it anymore. We spent the night at Father's friends near Mohegan. In the morning, we got up at sunrise and left. The sky was cloudy, and it hung down over our heads like a blanket. It's going to snow pretty soon, Father said. It's cold enough, I said. I think so. at night it will be anyway. I hope we beat it home. I don't want to travel 20 miles with the oxen slipping and sliding up and down every hill. He shook his head. We've got a problem, Tim. I want to avoid the Ridgeberry area where we ran into those so-called rebels before. I thought we'd curve south a little, hit into Connecticut at Wilton Parish, and then go up through Uppawong and Reading, but that'll take us half a day out of our way. And with the snow coming, I'm not so sure we should risk it. I didn't feel so easy when I thought about the cowboys. Do you think they might be waiting for us? He shrugged. Well, they know we have to come back sometime. The people of Mohegan heard a drower from Northfield had been shot on the Ridgeberry Road 2 days ago, and his cattle driven off. Was he killed? Nobody knew. The report may not be reliable anyway. He shook his head. I don't know, Tim. If it snows, we ought to go the shortest way home, but I don't like going back through Ridgeberry. How many do you think he should go back through Ridgeberry because of the snow? How many of you think he should go around the long way and take another half a day? How many aren't sure?
I'll pick the first one.
But you have to pretend that you are Tim and you're giving your dad advice. What advice would you give him?
You should just
way.
go
Go
the
long
other
way.
way.
Tomorrow we'll read the rest of the chapter to find out.